Welcome back to From Within She Rises. Today we are going to be dropping into an episode from the series Moments of Atonement, a space where I document the holy redirections that happen in the mess of real life. These are they're not mountaintop moments. These are low, gritty, often uncomfortable moments where something snaps and suddenly something sacred begins. So we're going to dive into the story. But before, let's take a breath together. Let's drop in. I'd like for you to close your eyes if you can. Don't do it if you're driving. Bring your awareness into your body. Begin to notice, where am I gripping? Where am I armored? Where have I been reacting from fear instead of responding from love? Inhale slowly through your nose. Let it rise like Eden remembered. Exhale through your mouth. Let it fall like the illusion dismantled. Inhale again. This time feel the land beneath your feet. Exhale, release your narrative about who's right or wrong. One more breath here. Inhale, open the gate to new awareness. Exhale, empty the ego's last defense. Let's begin. Today's episode is part of my Moments of Atonement, and it's called Polarity, Eden, and the Kindness That Breaks the Ego. This one came out of nowhere for me. It started with a book, something I wasn't even planning on reading. Sorry, my dogs are completely wild during this transmission. I'm sorry. I usually lock them out of the room, but my husband is outside working, and so I was like, I'm going to let them stay in here so they don't destroy the downstairs. Instead, they're going to destroy this episode, and that's fine. And also, if you're on YouTube, ow, am I right? I learned a lesson, but it's not going in this episode today. Yeah, back to the story of today's episode and not the story of my tomato red sunburn. Anyways, it came from a book I wasn't really planning on actually diving into at that moment, but just skimming through the beginning or the intro. And it ended in tears, in remembering. And remembering for me often ends in tears. In realizing that we've been calling the holiest lands on earth the enemy, and in watching how, even here in my own home, polarity became the very thing that made me go and seek God. This episode weaves together the revelation I had about the true location of Eden, the patterns I see in those who carry the frequency of kindness, and how sometimes the deepest act of remembrance begins when the ego can't hold its illusion anymore. So let's start with where it all began. I had to go lock up the dog. Shocking. Yeah. I wasn't planning on opening the other Bible. Let's see if you can see it here. This is the other Bible. Oh, yeah. Anyways, you can see it on the YouTube for a hot second there. I had it for a little while, the one with the Gnostic text, and I've read the Gnostic Bible before, but not the specific one that had a bunch of other things involved as well. These buried stories, the books, they purposely left out of the canon, and I told myself, I'll just skim it. I was tired. It was really late. I think it was already like 10:15, which for me is late. And I said, I said to myself, just skim it, just look through the intro a little bit. You don't need to dive in right now. But something told me to read that intro instead of just like skimming through the thing. Something told me to read it, and I did. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Something ancient literally cracked open in me as I was reading this. I read a line, and I'm going to pull this up. It's in the intro. And it said, today in Iran and southwest Iraq, a Gnostic offshoot of heterodox Jewish sects originally from eastern Syria and Palestine continue the Gnostic faith. And I froze because I knew I knew in that moment what I've always suspected was true. And that is that the land we've been told so much to fear might actually be the land where God first walked with us, Eden, the garden, the breath before the fall. It's there. Genesis literally says, I don't want to pull that book out there. Maybe I can. Can we? Anyways, Genesis literally says Eden sat at the source of 4 rivers, including the Tigris and the Euphrates. And those 2 rivers don't flow through Israel. They flow through Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey. The very places the Western ego has spent decades trying to demonize and invade and bomb. And suddenly I could feel it in my body. We have been trying to bomb Eden. Not metaphorically, but literally. I don't know, like, we live in such a strange world right now where it's okay for people to like make fun of this. And I understand it's a coping mechanism, but like when even the president of a country is posting memes about bombing or videos about bombing Iran, like it's just like funny. I don't even know. It's not funny. And let's like go back to the idea that if Eden is in these places, the Garden of Eden is actually located, if we think like as the ego, we have separated, and when we separated from God, our ego formed, and our ego has been in defense mechanism mode this entire time. So anytime we get close to awakening, our ego flares up, whether it's something within you or it's like a piece of the ego being flared up through people around you, through the collective. Okay. And you may have seen this already in your own life, right? You may have noticed when you're trying to make this shift, like I've talked about this in a previous episode, when I knew I had to release this identity of being a fitness coach, a wellness coach, and it being so rooted in aesthetics. And I felt like I had to start shifting. And then as I started shifting through this and like adding more breathwork at stuff and other things, then there was like a resistance, like an egoic resistance, because then I was like, oh, like the 1 month I didn't make quite as much as I typically would, and I was like, oh my God, and then my ego flares up, and then like my videos aren't being pushed out as much. And so anyways, like the ego flares, whether it's your own ego or whether it's ego around you, people around you, it will flare. So it's not lost on me that and the proof is in the pudding, if you will. The proof is in the Bible, if you want to look at it. So if the Garden of Eden is in these places that we're literally bombing, that doesn't shock me. It doesn't shock me that Christ then went to a place that needed, because it was so close. It was on the cusp of awakening, if you will. It was on the cusp of standing on the lands of Eden. So when the closer you get to awakening, the harder that ego fights. So it's not lost on me that even within those countries, there's division, but then very close nearby, there's a country that Christ was trying to spread the message of love that needed it so much. And that obviously still needs it, you know? So yeah, this land remembers the frequency of the Garden of Eden is still there, and the ego has been at war with it ever since. I literally laid in bed in tears. Not just from the revelation, but from the grief. And like just speaking about it, I'm literally going, every time I immerse myself in this, we're so close, but yet so far in so many ways. And I just sat there with tears streaming down my face in grief, because I realized this is not just about war. This is about forgetting who we are and what we do when we don't want to remember. Collectively, we fight back. Our ego just flares like you never did see. Around that same time last week, my son had his elementary school graduation. It was simple and sweet and so beautiful. And then something really beautiful happened, because there was 2 kindness awards that were given out to little children of color. And like all I could feel immediately was this wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a coincidence because like I'm gonna cry again. Um, in my body, I felt like the realization again of how much I needed to be in this deep polarity to seek out God. And these two kids were literally already living in it. They're already navigating the otherness in society that sees whiteness as the default. And what that tells me is this. Sometimes when you've lived with that much tension, 10-year-old living through that much tension, when you've tasted not belonging every single day of your life, kindness isn't just a virtue, it's your rebellion. It's your survival. It's your Christ. Kindness born in privilege is nice, but kindness forged in adversity, that's where your ego breaks. And it made me reflect, like I said, on my own life, on how even I needed polarity to crack open. My husband and I have always been best friends. We have never fought. We've been together how many years now? What year is it? I think this is going on 8 years. At the end of the summer here. And we, up until this past year, we've never had an argument. We've just been la-di-da. We've been best friends. But when he became a full-blown political supporter of someone, I started waking up. Everything changed because we fought a lot. He was deep, deep, deep into listening to a certain podcaster, if you will. I don't even think it's a podcast. It's like a radio show. That spews like it just has an underlying angry spirit, and it started blowing over into everything in our lives. Like everything. Because he was like, you are the sum of the people you spend the most time with. And he was spending the most time listening to this like 8 hours a day, like after work, it would be on as he was like chilling. During the day, he may not have been fully paying attention to it all the time, but it was on his phone, sitting on his desk, playing as he was supposed to be working. And he was working. I'm not saying he didn't work and he just listened to it, but it was like the background noise that was still being infiltrated and he didn't realize. And it got to the point where he was snappy and snarky and yelling at our children all the time. And I just didn't understand how he could support someone who didn't support everyone. And so we fought. We fought a lot. Yeah, I probably went to wring his neck a couple of times. I'm going to be completely honest, and I said this to him. He's probably never going to listen to this, but maybe he will. But it won't be shocking because I've already said it to him. Is that it got to the point where I was like becoming unattracted to him because it was just, I couldn't see past the polarity of it. I couldn't see past the why is he falling for this bullshit. And he probably also couldn't see past that in me. And we fought and I was angry and I was confused and I felt like we were speaking completely different languages. Like I would put things in my perspective and be like, well, if this happened to you, but it's not happening to me. And I just couldn't understand how he couldn't look past his own life, his own self. And somewhere in the heat of it, I just realized this was not about him. This was about me. It's always about you first. I needed something so uncomfortable and so disorienting and so triggering that it finally broke the illusion of peace that I had been clinging to. That fights, month-long fight, maybe months long. That polarity, because it was my first true moment of atonement. It sent me inward. It got to the point where, and I've talked about this before, I was like, I don't like feeling this way. I don't like fighting all the time. So that sent me like, how can I go in? How can I like add more breath work in, more Kundalini activation, more meditation, more focusing on the energy centers. It sent me to Jesus. It literally sent Jesus to me. Not the Jesus of the rules, but the Jesus of the truth, of tenderness, of remembering. It sent me down a path that literally allowed me to have a visceral vision of Christ. And not only that, have the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth descend upon me. So now when I see people trying to paint themselves as the victim, especially people that look of a certain complexion like myself, who've never faced true systemic adversity, I see the desperation. The ego will literally invent a polarity story if you haven't had enough real pain to surrender. Because some level, your soul knows that only in contrast do we finally choose to see the light. Yeah. And it's hard to talk about that because like I love my husband, but and like I said, we were best friends. And it's hard to talk about without going off on a lot of tangents because he's my world, but I'm going to try and stay on this particular thread. I have always believed in God, but I didn't live in surrender, not fully. I had this like surface level Christ consciousness, if you will, something innate, I think, from carrying my gate 25, the universal love frequency, a desire to be good, to do good, to love well. And I'm going to go off on a little tangent again, but I posted this on TikTok, on TikTok the other day, about how I truly believe that some of us come here knowing. Some of us are already half sealed and ready to be the 144,000 in the book of Revelation. Because I look back at my own childhood and it's conditioned out of us by the collective ego, right? And depending on like how deeply interwoven it is into your own close-knit family and community, it will be conditioned out faster or not. But I look back at my own childhood and I literally used to sit in my room by myself as an only child and contemplate my existence. Like, why am I here and what am I supposed to be doing? And then all of a sudden I guess what you can say is like astral project, and I would be up there looking down on myself and looking down on the rest of the humanity, the rest of Christ consciousness. And this isn't like a one-time event. It's something that I would recreate often to not feel so lost and alone. Like I would contemplate this nightly, and I would go up there and see humanity from that vantage point. And I'm talking not in a dream, but like fully conscious. And then at some point it stopped, right? It stopped when I was fairly young, to be fair. But I was deeply in a Catholic family that it was like, this is the rules and, so anyways, a little bit on the fact that I really fully my whole life have had I had deep-rooted Christ consciousness when I was first born, and then it was conditioned out of me, but I've always had the surface level. It's always been a part of who I am. And I didn't know how far away I was from that starting point until the actual polarity showed up in my marriage. We were best friends. I'm not joking. And yeah, the politics and at that point, I felt like my safety was gone, my identity. And when I reached that breaking point, it was like, nope, you got to go inward. And I have been, like I said, I've been building a beautiful life with Christ, but I hadn't built it. I hadn't built it until that point on surrender. I hadn't let Christ actually in. I might go to church, and we were very active. I think I probably felt and understood that this was where obviously your soul, if you listen to God, he's giving you pointers. He's pointing you in the right direction no matter what, if you're taught to listen. But I just felt so urged to go to the church that I went to. And then, and that was before we'd like surface level started fighting at that point, but not. And then it just snowballed. Like the timeline now looking back in hindsight is just so wild to me of how like my soul and God sent me to this church to have a foundation and really hunkering down in Christ, so that when the polarity really hit, I was like, nope, like that wasn't doing enough. I'd been reading the Bible, but it was meh. And I went in to let him like fully in. Yeah, I was like up until that point really trying to manage things with a spiritual overlay, if you will, without the actual death of ego. I think so many of us do that when our world becomes unbearable. We go inward, you know? I went inward. I got quiet. I started asking the real questions. I started seeking the real Christ, not as a symbol, but as a living presence. How can I, in every moment, choose what would Jesus do? And it changed everything. My marriage is like amazing again. We are best friends. We can have conversations. He might trigger me, but I'm living in the Christ consciousness and I find love and compassion in the moment. And I move through it and I atone in real time. And that's what we really want to be able to do, is like living in that. And I think despite him like not being deeply rooted in Christ, it doesn't matter because it rubs off on you. And I think when you start to think that you don't have the ability to change things, you do. You choosing. My son the other day was asking me in the car something about the bombing. And he's like, well, if somebody bombed you, aren't you going to bomb them back? And I'm like, well, first of all, nobody bombed the U.S., so we'll just leave it at that. But I was like, okay, so if somebody just punches you in the face and you're going to punch them back instead of just taking it, finding love and compassion, walking away, not getting farther hurt, and both of you further, it's a hard, right? It's a hard sell because, like, also I feel like you want to teach your kids to be strong, but is it actually strong to physically fight back? I don't know. I don't think Christ thinks so. He died on the cross to prove that it was not the right choice, or one of the reasons. That's not why he died on the cross, but it was what happened. So my marriage didn't dissolve. I did. The version of me that thought peace meant comfort. She had to go. Because the real peace of Christ only comes after you atone, after you meet your ego in the battlefield, and you choose not to hit send on the Facebook, perfect response, whatever, not to hit share. Ugh, I feel like that one's one that's like constantly coming through. There's this like TikTok video going around. I don't know if it's a real story or not, but it's like an interesting view on social media and phones, and I totally agree in the fact that we need to be more present and loving of each other. But also, it's a good tool for me for everyday atonement, because things are going to trigger you, and how can you constantly ask yourself, how would Christ see this? How would he find compassion for this person that's doing obscene things? And maybe you have the perfect comeback, but you remind yourself, what would Christ do? And maybe you tweak it so that it has more love and compassion in its message instead of more division and polarity. Or maybe you just don't hit send, And so I totally agree that we need to be more present within our lives and within the people around us. But I also realize that we live in a world that's very interconnected in the web. And it's also an opportunity for you to still spread that frequency of love. So when you also feel like you have to alienate yourself from everyone just to be okay, that's not atonement either. It's really an active choice of choosing love every time something triggers you. Love and compassion. And it's fucking hard, but the more you do it, the more those neural pathways build and the easier it becomes. It does become your default. Now we're going to move on to a little bit more, because we've already touched on it at the beginning here, and this one's going to piss some people off. And if it does, I lovingly invite you to breathe through it. Something that I've been seeing more and more lately is the weird reversal where people of my complexion, white people, if you will, especially in spiritual, well, not even in spiritual and alternative spaces, just people in general. I feel like I see it a lot in like political justification, are trying to paint themselves as the oppressed. Suddenly they're the ones that have been persecuted. Their freedom is what is under attack. They're becoming the victims of everything. And look, I'm not saying that the systems are not broken. That's not what I'm saying. And yes, censorship is real. The world is literally insane right now. But what I see underneath a lot of that is something way deeper. People who never actually suffered trying to manufacture a polarity arc. Like, they've never suffered themselves. So how do I make this about us? Because somewhere in the soul, we know that the true awakening comes from contrast. We do. I think we really know it comes through pain, through pressure, through collapse. If you read the book of Revelation and see it as the death of the ego, which is what it is that you releasing your ego, deconstructing, burning the old you through purification and rising like this beautiful soul you're meant to be, and remembering. So if you haven't lived through it, if you haven't lived that polarity, we try to simulate it. I don't think we realize that that's what we're doing, but we dramatize everything nowadays. Literally, like I was saying earlier, we live in a really weird world where we're trying to make fun of everything that's going around. But we dramatize everything. We invent enemies. We try to spiritualize discomfort so we can feel like martyrs. But in reality, we've just never had to develop the spiritual resilience that comes from being the one who is always pushed to the outside. And that's why I think those kids at my son's graduation hit me so hard. They have lived adversity by 10. They've lived otherness every single day. And they still chose kindness. That is the frequency of Christ. That is what we're missing when we center our own narratives instead of asking who has already carried this weight far longer than we have. Because honestly, some people aren't choosing love because they're spiritually advanced. They're choosing love because they have no other option, because they've been walking through polarity since birth. So here's the hard truth. If you haven't faced that kind of adversity, if we haven't faced it and we still refuse to choose love, that's not oppression. That is your ego. And we need to stop confusing the two of them. So here we are. After all that grief, all that polarity, the fight, the forgetting, the unraveling, this is where the remembering begins. Because Eden, the Garden of Eden, was never a place to be conquered. It was a frequency we were meant to return to choose to return to. That's why in the book of Revelation, the devil, the ego, if you will, is only locked up for 1,000 years, because we do still have free will. We have free will, and God has faith in us, like we have faith in him, that we will continue to choose to remember. When I think back to that moment, reading that line in the other Bible about these Gnostic sects still practicing Christ consciousness in Iran, I realized the garden did not vanish. It just got buried beneath empire. But it's still there. It's in the soil. It's in the story, in the memory your body carries. Especially when you finally get still enough to feel it. The thing is, we're still looking for the garden. Some try to recreate it through utopias, some through spiritual bypassing, some through politics or power or perfection. But the ones who actually touch it are the ones who let go, who stop fighting to be right, who fall to their knees, who get so exhausted from the ego's games and they whisper, I can't do it like this anymore. And finally ask for Christ. That's what happened to me through marriage, through motherhood, through watching the world tear itself apart and realizing that the kingdom of God wasn't in a flag or a temple. It was in the breath I'd been avoiding, the stillness I'd been resisting. And so now I see it clearly. We're not just trying to bomb Eden. We're trying to erase the memory of a God who never needed a middleman, a God who walked with us before we were afraid, before we ate the fruit of separation, before we built the walls and the temples and the nations and the labels and the borders. But the garden never left. It's still right here. It's in the inhale. It's in the surrender, in the choosing of kindness when it costs you something. And if this land remembers, then maybe, just maybe, we still can too. So thank you for being with me through this spiral. If you're here listening, breathing, remembering, then you are a part of the healing. And if this cracked you open too, you're not alone. I thank you. I love you. See you in the next spiral.